This is Gabriel, custodian of Watchman Privacy. I know why you're here. You're looking to escape the technocratic apparatuses that you see slowly enveloping you and restraining your freedom. For the fundamentals of privacy, you should start by visiting escapethetechnocracy.com to see my video tutorials, books, and other resources for getting off the surveillance grid. Watchman Privacy and Escape the Technocracy are leading the fight for privacy, and unlike just about any other show, we practice what we preach. Private payment options, no threat modeling, no statist or collectivist solutions, and no sponsors, ever. You know what that means? It means we can speak the unmitigated truth as we see it. Your support alone determines the future of this show. Go support you and me at escapethetechnocracy.com. So we had a listener write in asking us about certain things pertaining to the Kipu. Okay, now the Kipu is this product that we created on escapethetechnocracy.com, and it is a very ingenious, if we don't say so ourselves, seed phrase backup kit. We didn't learn this ourselves. We learned it from the Incas. And so we studied the Incas and how they held out in the face of the Spanish who tried to conquer them, and they held out for 40 years. And the Kipu was this cool little encrypted cipher that they used to hide information. And we had somebody write in with a number of questions, and it got us thinking about things like security through obscurity, about obfuscation, the difference between obfuscation, steganography, and encryption. And we started thinking even about the Enigma Machine. I'm joined by Urban, my friend Urban, and Urban's the perfect person to talk about this because he has thought a lot about these things. He is the chief architect of the Eldorado backup kit. So why don't you get us started off, Urban? What are these sorts, what do you think is the person who wrote in, what do you think is the overarching idea that they're trying to convey?
You know, if you listen to like podcasts about privacy and digital security and cybersecurity, you might have encountered, you should never do security with obscurity, right? You have those principles that, you know, everything should be open source and the only secret is the keys to unlock the data, to decrypt whatever message you have. And if you look at cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, it uses this principle brilliantly, right? The whole code is open source. Everybody can, you know, audit it. But the secret itself is the password. That is the secret. And that is true. And in our marketing material for the Kipu backup kit, we use the phrase, you should use security through obscurity. And that got our listener confused, like which one should it be? And are we doing this wrong? And the answer is both are correct at the same time. And hopefully today we can clarify and we can also learn some interesting lessons from history, most notably from what you said about Enigma Machine and the subsequent development that happened in World War II and later on.
For those of you who purchased the Eldorado Cipher kits, definitely go and download the latest PDF by the time this releases. We have made some updates, modifications. I think we'll also have a video explaining it a little bit because it's a little bit of a complicated thing. And if you haven't purchased the Eldorado Cipher kit, this is the coolest backup kit that you can find on the internet. Back up your seed phrase, your passwords in a way that is not at all going to scream Bitcoin or crypto. It just looks like a piece of jewelry. And it's a nice little craft that you can do for the weekend. So that is what we'll be talking about. So definitely go look that up while you're listening so you have an idea of what we're talking about. Now, let's just start with some vocabulary, Urban. People use words like obfuscation, steganography, encryption. How do we differentiate between these ways of hiding information?
Let's break it down. Let's take the most common one, which is encryption, right? Now, through this process, you make the data unreadable unless you have the keys or, you know, the algorithm. And you could imagine it's like scrambling the data in a way. You know, it's scrambling it's not random because obviously you can decode it, but you try to make the data as random looking as possible. So you make it that it has no pattern, it has no repetitive structure, it's like completely. After encrypting the data, it is pretty obvious that this is encrypted. I mean, there are two options. It's either encrypted or it's random, right? And then you might be in a situation where you have to explain whether you have random data on your hard drive, right? And it would be hard. It's hard to know if it's encrypted or not, but in short, it will look random. That is encryption. Now, the other key word that you mentioned is steganography. And this is different. This is hiding the data, making it look like it's not the initial data. Now, I will give probably the easiest example that people could think of is, an example of steganography would be if you write a short poem, like a haiku, and then the first letter of every word means something different. And this is steganography. Now, in steganography, the data is not encrypted, but it's hidden. So when you look at a haiku or a poem or a book, it looks like a normal book. There is nothing weird about it, but there are like two data. There is the one that everybody sees, and then there is the hidden data, steganography. So those are the two major difference between, so it's, in a way, it protects the data, but they both use very different techniques. That is like very important to learn and to understand the difference between both.
We have steganography, we have encryption, we have early ciphers, and basically, right, trying to hide information, trying to randomize information. What about Urban, the idea of trying to have some privacy, security, whatever we want to call it, while still having the tool itself be quite public?
So this was, historically, this was a tough problem to do. Like the first encryption that people can think of is usually the Caesar cipher. Now, in the case of Caesar cipher is, you take letter A, you make it B, you take letter B, you make it C, etc. But if you think about it, like, let's ignore that this is, there is not even a key, and it's trivial to just try out all combination, even by hand. If we ignore those two weaknesses, the big problem is as soon as I explain how the algorithm works, it's very, very simple to change it. Now, if you're a military army, you need to teach, your people, your soldier, your general, to how to encrypt data or to hide it. And then as soon as the enemy knows how to do this, you need to retrain people in a completely different algorithm. And that is like a major, that is not very efficient. Basically, up until the Enigma machine, there was no easy way, there was no easy device, it was a bit cumbersome. And as soon as the device was captured by the enemy, things would be very dramatic because you could immediately decrypt everything. And then they would need to come up with a brand new system. And this was like a weakness. Or they would need to learn all sorts of exotic formula like the Visionaire cipher, and then it's not trivial to do. Now, there was a guy called August Kirchhoff who came up with 6 principles on what should be a good encryption system. I'm not going to read the 6 principles because some of them are outdated, but in short, what he said was that it should be non-stressful to use for obvious reason. It should be digital so that you can send it through the telephone, the telegraph, etc. And it should not rely on closed source. Everybody should know how it works. The only secret should be the key, because the key is simple to change, not the device itself. Now, when Enigma was created, and initially it was created for businesses, banks, etc. What happened is the machine itself, anyone could buy it. But then the secret were the rotors. Now you could say, well, what if the rotors are stolen? It's still, security by obscurity. But if you think about it, it's much easier to change rotors than to change the whole device. And you could just create a new set of rotors. Even better, you could have different rotors per company. So company A could have, the set A, B, C, D, and company C could have a completely different set. This would make it secure for both companies. Another interesting aspect of it was that the same machine would be used for decoding and encoding. And again, this leads to less stress because an operator could be easily trained. the Germans were very interested into the machine very early on, and they improved it to make it more robust because it had some known weaknesses even at the time. The most obvious one is that one letter is not encrypted by itself. So if you press letter A, the way the machine works means that the output will never be letter A. So it's not fully random. And that is a problem. We won't go into the mathematics of why it's a problem, but in short, you can already remove a lot of possibilities by just this simple weakness. So the Nazi Germany, they took this machine and they added more routers to make it harder.
Maybe you could just explain for people, what was the Enigma machine? Why was it significant? How did it work?
So the Enigma machine was invented by someone in Sweden, and he wanted a way to secure communication between like companies, like private sector, like banks, stock market, etc. And this machine was revolutionary because the idea was that everybody should be able to buy it, right? And the security should be based on some kind of keys, because if now all the companies, even competitors, have the same machine, how do you ensure that the message are still secure? The security is mainly by the position of the routers and the combination inside, like the physical combination inside the routers themselves. Now you might think, well, isn't this still security by obscurity? And in a way it's true, but if you think about it, it's much easier to replace a set of routers than to replace an entire machine. And furthermore, once you train an operator on the machine, then they can, it's trivial and very cheap to have as many routers as you need. And this was one of the upgrades that the German did later on. So this machine comes from the commercial world, the private sector. And the Germans were looking at a way to secure, their message. So they bought some machines and they started to make some improvement because there were already at the time some weaknesses that was known. They made some improvements. And the most obvious weakness is that one letter cannot be encrypted with the same letter. So if you think about it, if you write, the word hello and you type H, the letter that comes out of the machine will never be H. Now, I won't go into many details why this is a problem, but you can imagine that this removes a lot of possibilities. And it means that the output is not fully random. And this was one of the weaknesses. Now, the German, they solved this issue by adding what's called a plug board, where you could just permute two random letters how you see fit. But there were other unknown weaknesses, and the worst one was what is known as a plain text attack, which is if you know what text is encrypted, you could recover the keys, and if you recover the keys, then you can decrypt the machine. Now, both the Polish and later the British, led by Turing, they knew how the Enigma machine worked. They could even buy one if they wanted to, right? This was not a secret. But what they didn't know was the position of the routers and the internal connection of those routers and the switchboard. So by using the other weakness, what happened is the German would always start the message with something like Hi Hitler. And this meant that if you knew that it's likely that the first letter is an H and then an E, etc., you could start to eliminate possibilities and go from there to try to recover the keys. This process is very tedious by humans, so they built, equivalent of the Enigma machine, like replicas, to simulate all the possibilities. And this became, the ancestor of computers that we use to this day. When you look at this and with the insight of history, it might seem like, why didn't the German change those machines if they were broken? There are like a few things to realize is everybody was using some kind of variation of this machine, including the Allies. And the German themselves couldn't break SIGABA, which is the Allied equivalent, if you're curious. And because they couldn't break, and like both machine look and works in similar ways, they thought that their own version was secure, which it was not. Another problem is the German knew in their manual that they shouldn't repeat the same word over and over, like Hi Hitler, for instance. But the operator, they were not properly trained, and they would use this often. And the British, they also tricked the German into sending the same message twice. So what they would do is they would pretend to go and bomb a place. And then they would note that, the spies and the ground observator, they would write back in Germany, hey, we saw bombers going in the direction of Paris. And if you know that in the message there is likely to have Paris, bombers, and maybe there were 5, you could do the same attack, even if you don't start the message with like hello or whatever.
What is the connection, Urban, our listener also wants to know, between the Enigma machine and Unix?
Nowadays, it's well known that the effort made by the Polish and the British to crack it with like computers and all of those things. However, you need to understand that at the time this was considered a military secret, especially because those machines were thought to be unbreakable. And the variant of Enigma got a life on their own after the war. We won't go in details, but there is the interesting story of Crypto-AG, which was later used in a spy operation. Probably a future Torchlight episode at some point. So the British destroy the decryption, devices. And fast forward, but still people knew how Enigma works. This was public information. So you ended up with encryption, like Enigma-like encryption into system like Unix's and in other places done in software, because people were not aware of those weaknesses. Now, what you need to realize is in all those cases, you still don't address a root issue, which is the message is obviously encrypted, right? It's encrypted, it looks random. There were some obfuscation, and obfuscation is, you break the last remaining pattern. So in the case of Enigma, what the Enigma machine would do is it groups all the text into a chunk of 5 letters, so that you don't know when a word starts and ends. But that's the limit of it. And the truth is, when you intercept a message like this, it is obvious to know that there is hidden information in it. Now, in many cases, that is not a problem, but that could become one. So to give you a modern example, in certain countries where internet is heavily censored, when you try to do an encrypted connection that is unknown to outside, there are software that just shut it down. Now, they might not know what you're saying, but it looks random and they cannot decode it, so they might as well, just shut it down. And in cases like what interests us, which is cryptocurrency backup and password backup, if you have in your place a piece of equipment that looks like it's encrypted information, even if it's random, well, you might be in a big trouble to explain. And especially if like a burglar or someone who mugs you, who robs you, knows that, a crypto wallet looks like 12 words, that makes it very easy to target you. Okay, so encrypting it is not sufficient. And even if it's random, it's not sufficient. And now we go to the other aspect, which is steganography, which is hiding the information itself into something innocuous. This is security by obscurity. That is 100% security by obscurity. So for your encryption, you want security by open source, and you want the secret to be only the keys. But if you are trying to hide the information itself, then you must rely on encryption through steganography. Now, in our case, there have been people getting tortured to reveal their seed phrase. That happened, you can look on internet, right? There have been also people who got their safe open and all their, seed backup stolen. And then it's a matter of, just inputting the seed and getting the money. But what if you could hide the information itself in something that looks different. And this is where we come into place. And the Kipu is not our only product. We have other ones that look like, a birthday card, that looks like some wedding, a Christmas card. And they all have the same philosophy in common, which is they do not look like Bitcoin backups. And you need to distinguish those two things. And most influencers out there that are trying to sell you expensive products, they do so, but the whole thing is very obvious. And you could say, well, it's good because the security should only be the encryption itself. Yeah, potentially, but you need both, actually. You need both, which is why, you need both, and you need to make sure that both are working to protect you.
Hey, thanks for listening. Look, I could use your help real quick. If you could share this, engage with me in some way, leave a review anywhere. This really helps me to break the technocratic shadow banning that is happening with my brand. And of course, if you really want to escape the technocracy, go to escapethetechnocracy.com. Privacy tutorial series, books, consulting, and of course, you can leave a donation. Thank you very much.